Our first speaker for the afternoon is Erin Miller. Erin's an advocacy specialist at People First and has been public speaking since she was 8 years old. In addition to her work, she's completed the LEND program, Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental and Related Disorders, which you heard Josie mention earlier yesterday, and Wisconsin Women's Network Fellowship. Erin is one of the co-founders of Save Iris and frequently guest lectures at UW-Milwaukee's Special Education Department, where she trains future caring professionals going for their autism certificate. During the summer, she raises monarch butterflies and mentors at Superstars Performing Arts Team for kids on the spectrum and their typically developing peers. And they also invite those with other disabilities to join them at that camp. So welcome, Erin Miller.
Hi, my name is Erin Miller. Do I speak into like an ice cream cone or just hold it up like this?
Your choice.
And today is all about choices. That's going to be interesting. Hi, my name is Erin Miller, and welcome to Living the Good Life, which is kind of funny considering how I got here. After my undergrad, the plan was to go to take a year off and go into library science. But I graduated in the middle of the recession, and I was unemployed for a long time. But instead of just sitting around the house all day, I figured I would apply for my state's Partners in Policymaking training and learn disability ethics. And at this event last year, yes.
It's hard to tell.
That's okay, just roll with it. At this event last year, I learned that library staff had not had any training in developmental disability. So I figured I'd share some of what I learned. In the last 10 years, I've met people and explored corners of the world that library staff just might not come across every day. But 10 years is a long time. Let's narrow that down a little bit. I know broader developmental disability. I have my lived experience as an autistic person. And I know select pieces of Medicaid as it relates to long-term care. Looks like spontaneity is the name of the game today. All right, back to what I don't know, which is probably many things. What I don't know is the private sector, physical disability, and large swaths of the Medicaid program. Honestly, Medicaid is a massive program that serves so many different populations. Yay, I remembered to push down and go to the next slide. One thing I've learned is that people with significant disability can learn grade level material. And let me futz around with my cards a little more and be more spontaneous. My friend's son is a high school sophomore with a significant disability. Last year, he was using most or all of his instruction time on basic bathroom behaviors. This year, in a different school, he's learning high school grade level material. What happened? This year he is lucky enough to be with a group of people who is willing to acknowledge his capabilities. Notice the words on the student's biology exam: carnivore, herbivore, biome. They might not have the expressive communication to say all the things that's inside their head. They might not be able to select fill in the blank or multiple choice. they are able to get across. Hey, I know what that one is. That one eats meat. In their world history test, students using blocks to spell out vocabulary words like Africa, trade, masks. P is where the student has been prompted, and A is where they needed some assistance after getting a prompt. They're using hand-over-hand supports, but they're still able to get across that they know something about world trades and history. Allison Ford did a study in 2001, and one of the huge takeaways there was that all but 1% of those most significantly disabled can learn grade level. Wow, all but 1%. And I really wanted you to see this because I think so often we see what the system looks like when it's broken. And we seldom get to see what it looks like when it really works well. Look at what can happen when we have customized supports to the individual. Look at what can happen when we have a method to our madness instead of just trying to throw things together on the fly. And it kind of makes me wonder, how can we support schools in developing and storing curriculum modifications? How can we help IEP teams so they don't have to reinvent the wheel every year? When I started advocating professionally, I started learning that autism and other disabilities overlap in some places, though we're not exactly identical. There are some accommodations that help both groups, autism and intellectual disability. Things that help both groups include shorter paragraphs. Shorter paragraphs can help with language processing, executive functioning. More pictures can help with visual learners, help people with just slower processing speed. Concrete events and experiences can help people who are literal thinkers and people who just like to live in the moment. And perhaps our group does. While I'm at it, I should mention that, just a bit of housekeeping. There will be a list of resources circulating on the listserv after the conference, so you don't have to scramble to write everything down. It looks like it's been one of those days for everybody. Just roll with it. Describing the need literally gets the need met without talking down to a person. It really is nice to be able to talk to somebody one-on-one and do things that other people their age do, rather than, oh look, I'll glue a cotton ball to a stick and make money. And what's cool about this is that it serves both people. Somebody who's autistic and a literal thinker, they don't have to trip over the metaphors. And we can acknowledge that a 60-year-old man with an intellectual disability has experiences that a third grader, that a 5-year-old just doesn't. It doesn't carry the same stigma as a third grade reading level. And here's where being autism specific, I think, is critical. Being uncomfortable, but being able to take one step. Can you tell this is an important point? when I worked in Superstars Camp and an inclusive arts camp, about a third of our staff is on the spectrum. And one of the main things that I do is is to spot potential meltdowns and keep them from getting any bigger. And it just goes to show you that there's just so many things going on that some days you just have to go off script. And one thing I've figured out is that my colleagues and I bring different perspectives to our work. We're going to go down, bring that back in. Fitting. As somebody who's experienced both having an autistic brain and working to regulate the rest of the world, my first impulse is to accommodate. And the reason why my first impulse is to accommodate is because when I have to figure out how to control my different body, I have to figure out how to go from tipping over and out of control back to center and steady. The thing I'm looking for in my kids is to be comfortable, still shaky, but still able to take one step. Small step can be the difference between having one of those days when you're getting close to having a meltdown, when you're getting close to just going off the rails. And being able to be successful. And obviously, if you can see that one step, great. You found a place where your student can be successful. If they can take one step, just one thing at a time. If they can't, it's probably time to back off and try to get back to that center place. Get back to that uncomfortable, but still able to take one step. Whatever discomfort means for them. Maybe you've got a gal who loves to move and needs to move. Maybe taking walking breaks would be great for her. Or bouncing on your heels, rocking back and forth. Maybe you have a sensory avoider. And you can't have complete silence. It just is impossible. Being able just to pare it back a little bit, being able to take it from being so urgent, so critical, that you have to act right now. Being able to take just a few seconds. Sometimes even just a few seconds of being able to make it a little bit less intense. It goes for the 5 seconds it needs to go out the door. And avoid one of those explosive situations. In any case, uncomfortable is different for everyone. Feel free to modify for your folks. Social awareness can also be difficult if you're unfamiliar with the culture. Because autism is as much a culture as it is a disability label. after traveling in many disability circles, the pattern seems to be that those who are not autistic want to fit in and be like everybody else. Whereas folks on the spectrum don't seem to mind if we're different. And one thing I'm always careful to communicate is I've got those occasions where I'm awkward. And if I say something doesn't sound quite right, it's almost never because I mean to be. And I'm always willing to ask, how can I better understand how you feel? One thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes the way a person is behaving is not because is due to self-regulation. It's a way of reeling it in and keeping control in their environment. It's not a matter of being naughty. Accommodations, at their core, they're tools. Accommodations are just like a different road to get to the same place. It looks a little different because it's a detour, but if it does the same thing, why not? When I was going over the slides this morning, I was going to say that we probably would have dual diagnosis in the library. But really, considering our population, you're definitely going to run into dual diagnosis. What with all the mental health stuff? During my year with Lent, I was talking with my family mentor about his daughter, who was dually diagnosed with Down syndrome and autism. And while I was talking with Dad, we were having a conversation about our sensory differences, and I mentioned that my sense of touch is not quite as sensitive as you would think. He sort of looked at me and was like, wow, that kind of surprises me. I would have thought that autism was being super intense and focused on everything, and being hyper aware. That doesn't seem to fit my daughter with a visible intellectual disability at all. And what I said back to him was, well, I think what we're looking at here is self-regulation. You've got a bunch of fancy medical words, you've got your high school biology stuff, but at the end of the day, basically it's just internal stability. It's keeping things the same inside. And after that, I started thinking, this experience, along with working at the Down Syndrome Association, along with being autistic myself, it made me wonder, what if the world at large is seeing stereotype for autism, which is mostly distant, rocking back and forth, what have you, and then placing that next to the stereotype for Down syndrome, which is always happy, outgoing, gregarious, and if you place the two side by side, they don't seem to fit at all. And then our affected families don't know what to expect. I'm also starting to suspect that other disability communities stigmatize autism as being naughty, where in autistic communities, we sometimes look down on people with intellectual disabilities as just not worth very much. And honestly, I'm wondering if they're getting the worst stigma from both sides, just both in terms of information and in terms of community. And maybe that could change if affected families knew something about the two cultures. Remote monitoring. Basically, you put a camera in someone's house. For folks who are medically complex, actually they're going to have a lot of cares and having people with them all the time. I don't know about you, but it sure doesn't look private to me if to see a camera in my house. But all things are relative. I guess it's a matter of calculating risk. It's probably more private to have a camera in your house than to have somebody standing right next to you on your tail at all times. Another mom friend of mine uses a tracking app called Find My Friends. And with it, she allows her young adult son to get a little freedom and get out of the house. So he's able to go to the corner store and just get out of mom's watchful life for a second. Mom can then type, "You made a wrong turn, go left." One other thing I'd like to mention is that people who are very verbal sometimes choose to wear tracking devices. Which kind of goes to show that the people who appear to have it together really don't sometimes. Another takeaway that I had was that, well, maybe families choose the more restrictive option because they just don't know what else is out there. Maybe people just don't know what kind of things are possible. If sex ed is a topic of interest, you can Google her name, Terry Cohenhoven. And again, there is the resource list circulating around, so if you missed the first time, it's not a huge deal. Is one of Wisconsin's long-term care programs. I think, as far as I know, this is unique to Wisconsin, something that we've homegrown, that it may be one of the few that are self-directed. I've seen folks who like managed care because they have to do less work. It's a little less work to have a case manager and a nurse and stuff like that. But honestly, there are just some things that are just more fun to do yourself. And a couple years back, the governor wanted to cut hours and just eliminate it as a program from the budget. The community responded and said, "No, we want this. We're willing to fight for this." So moms, dads, people with disabilities, everybody banded together to form a nonpartisan grassroots advocacy, and what we have today is Save Iris. Advocating with Save Iris, I met another mom who uses something called PersonCentered Planning. Basically, person-centered planning is just a disability word for what everybody does. It's how you have a life. Build a future that's consistent with your dreams, your desires, your interests. Maybe you don't want to to go to bed right now. Maybe you don't want to have to get up when everybody else does. Maybe you want to microwave a burrito in the middle of past midnight, and nobody tells you no, you can't. I'm a Taco Bell person myself, so I get that. Anyway, but gosh, for all of us, just the kind of life we want. It's a lot better than saying, no, you can't do that. No, this is going to be the problem. Well, how do we make that happen? And that's what person-centered planning is all about. The person. On the side, there are search terms that give folks a place to start looking. Just one of those things where you start in one place and then it leads to another, and leads to another, and leads to another. But just being able to open the door, that might be an application for folks in the library staff. Things like acronyms like PATH, MAPS, terms like supported decision making. This is my friend's daughter's plan. As you can see, we're taking a broader look at first at skills we want to focus on each year. Personal care, employment, career, life safety, that kind of stuff. But really, 10 years is a long time. This is just a way to take it into more bite-sized chunks, just to make it a little more manageable. I couldn't think 10 years ahead without a plan. Now we're getting into details. These are individual skills and how to implement them. How do those little things figure into the bigger goal? Things like how to use social media safely. Knows what to do in case of fire or tornado. Knows how to safely cross an intersection that's unmarked. All of these are just smaller steps, little steps, leading up to life safety in 2009. Autism is not new. Let's just have it out there. My generation may have brought autism into the spotlight, but it's always been with us. And it's not unique to the US either. US numbers were 1 in 65. Korea was 1 in 38 as of 2011. But what puzzles me most is that for all of the lively conversations we have in our communities, nobody seems to be talking about the fact that we are now serving people who would have been hidden away in institutions. And this isn't the first time we've had this conversation either. Rosemary Kennedy brought intellectual disability into the spotlight, where she was hidden away. And after that became known, the rest of the world began to know that, yeah, disabilities in our community, it can happen in any family, anyone. Actually, you can become disabled at any point in your life. This is the only minority that you can enter into at any point in your life. Especially if you're lucky enough to live to be old. Point is, if you support disabled people, you'll see a lot more of them. Not just autism. But at least we have the structures now. From that from Rosemary Kennedy came things like the university centers, things like Special Olympics, the healthcare legislation that we have and that our foundation is on today. But there's something that's always been on my heart. What about the weird kid who never lived up to their potential? Where does this leave aging autistics? Homeless folks? People of color? People who are generally recognized late? There are going to be a lot of you wondering, well, what do I do now? We don't have anything to give them. It's kind of a big question. It's going to take a long time to suss out. But the first step is to ask for services for older adults. Today, start today. It took years to get birth to 3 to become standard. Just birth to 3. It would be a great help to people who need things now, as well as start improving the system for when your kids start to age. As an advocate, I've sat on various boards, groups, committees, what have you. And one thing I've always, that I keep encountering again and again and again, is that I'm often the only autistic person on said boards. When I'm talking with a mom of a son with significant disability, I'm not sure why, but our conversations always seem to end the same way. You're so high functioning. You're so different from my son. I know how to pick my battles. And just in terms of sheer gamesmanship, it's a lot easier to quote unquote win. I don't really see conversations as a competition if I don't talk about complicated parts of my life, or life in general. But I don't want to play games.
Life is hard enough as it is.
I wish I had more relationships like one described by Matt Carey, parent advocate. There is a place for advocates who have a very narrow focus. Say, only autistics with intellectual disability, or only self-advocates. But the strongest advocates are those who see beyond their own self-interests, who advocate for those in the community whose needs differ from one's own self-interest, even if that self-interest is in supporting a loved one. Or to put it simply, I expect that self-advocates will support advocacy that directly benefits kids and adults who require 24-hour support. Like my kid. Just as I think self-advocates deserve advocacy support from parents like myself. I keep searching for my card because saying thank yous is so important, and I want to be sure that I say how thankful I really am. That I'm here, that I'm able to be here to be with change makers who really want to go out and do things. Dedicated people who have a lot of heart. And are going to take the next steps. I guess I don't need to be eloquent. Hats off to you. Sure.
Erin will take some questions.
Sure, yeah.
So you mentioned support for like adults.
Yes.
Like what would, I guess from your experience, like what would you personally like to see like as a support for adults? Like there's anything specific based on maybe like your own needs?
Just off the top of my head or my own needs, or we're a pretty diverse community. I'm just trying to figure out how to.
How about, let's go off of your needs.
Oh. Well, just the first thing right off the top of my head is that I'd like to be able to talk to you. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm able to talk with other parents because I'll either get shut down or just it's just complicated when you have your own memories of growing up as a kid and now you're also meeting them eye to eye and just those different things sort of clash strangely. It's just being able to negotiate that a little bit.
Yeah. So for people to listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you talk to self-advocates that are thinking about trying to move into their own apartments who have intellectual and developmental disabilities?
Sometimes, yes.
I take it you live on your own?
With supports, yes.
And so are those like roughly like a few hours a week, or I'm just trying to get a picture? Because what I do in my role as the biggest family advocate is share the living options available in Illinois for people who are selected from this wait list for services.
Yeah.
And I find myself partnering with the Corporation for Supportive Housing, which just went down to Missouri this week to look at how Mo Housing has what are called community living coordinators. And so while I share the complicated process of having the Independent Service Coordination Agency get people on the SRN so they can use a part of their SSI to pay for a lease in an apartment of their own or with someone of their own choosing, and have maybe a project-based Section 811 subsidy pay for the other part of the rent. I don't find either the self-advocates attending these meetings sufficiently enough, those who are waiver eligible, which are very generally have to meet these eligibility standards, nor do I find the parents, let's put it this way, I'm making this too complicated. The intellectual and developmental disability community is the last group in Illinois accessing permanent supportive affordable housing.
Yeah.
And yet, particularly for people with autism, from my limited experience of a nephew who's 22 with high support needs in autism, and my son who's on the spectrum but would not be waiver eligible, it's often the best living situation where you're not living with 7 other strangers who have various needs.
Yeah.
And you don't really need someone awake on the couch while you're sleeping. You and I talked. But it's very difficult to even communicate this potential. Eric talks about the dignity of risk.
Yeah.
And it's a very guardian-led, parent, fearful community. I'm almost stunned how, after a year of providing, this information, I can't think of one example of someone who I have worked with who has chosen to pursue that kind of, I can't think of one.
Well, just to start, housing is a beast. If we would be here all day, we could have an entire conference on housing, but just a place to start with is, let's just start with one source first. The one I know best right now is this thing called Moving Out Inc. in Madison. They list all these housing options, things like buying a house that your family grew up in, and all sorts of these things that I don't see in other places. But there are some things that might be specific to Wisconsin, but there are also things that might transfer over to other places. It's just solving a problem is if you're not sure what exactly to do, find something like it, and then see if you can jump off and see if that leads to other sources, leads to other sources, leads to other sources. 'Cause, yeah.
How do self-advocates find about opportunities like that? Do you have to be in something and you hear the inside scoop, or is there another way to get hints as to what's available out there?
I suppose everyone has their own different social circles. The way I found out about it is that my state has that Partners in Policy program that is sponsored by a developmental disability council. Every state in U.S. territory has a developmental disability council, or like the ARC. That's where I first found out about things. But once I got there, I've met other people who have met other people and who met other people, and it's just sort of, if you just have one good source, if you just have something to work with, you'll be able to bounce off and go into, and it'll open doors. It's just opening that door that's really the first thing. Yeah.
I just can tell you that Illinois, if you're in Illinois, does have partners in policymaking through the Illinois Council on Developmental Disabilities. And that is open to people who want to learn more about creating equitable policies for individuals with various disabilities, and they encourage self-advocates to go through that program.
And what's really cool is that they get to talk with parents and they get to learn from each other.
Right.
So it isn't all the butting heads and the sensationalism. It's real close. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your voice, your experience as a self-advocate. I found it really powerful. I also, as a librarian, we see groups of individuals coming into the library, maybe on their own, or with caregivers who have the people have intellectual disabilities. And as librarians, we are sometimes having to navigate conversations with caregivers while also respecting the choice of the individual with intellectual disabilities. Sometimes that can be difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what recommendations you have as a self-advocate for how librarians can better support you when there are caregivers or parents involved in situations.
I gotta say, there isn't an easy process. There isn't a ABC 1, 2, 3 no straight answer. It's hearing somebody whose ideas of how life should work is different. It's just gonna be a little bit of a mess sometimes, and it's not expecting everything to follow the straight neat lines is going to be immensely helpful. If you've already got in your head what you're gonna say, what's this? What's that saying? I think it's pretty universal. It's listening to understand rather than listening to reply. That works wonders. That works a lot here. Does that get at what you want to know?
Yeah, it does. And you remind me with your talk that as librarians, we also need to make sure that it's the individual and not the parent's voice that should also be listened to.
Although I've also seen parents with intellectual disabilities, parents with disabilities, so that makes things a little more interesting. That's also an interesting dynamic.
Thank you.
How are we doing for time, sir?
We're doing fine.
Yeah.
So in libraries, we certainly do a lot of programming revolving around resources and supporting needs in the community, but we also want to do programs that are entertaining and fun and So the question is how do we market our programs to let the autistic community know that we will do whatever we can to accommodate a variety of needs in our programs, and we really want everyone to be included. Like what recommendations do you have for, say, a music program or, Comic-Con or something that would help get the word out? Like what kind of language should we be using?
Is the question what kind of language you should be using, or is the
Well, like
or the
when-
question, I'm trying to figure out what.
Yeah, like how do we say explicitly, please come, everyone welcome. We want to include people who are, on the autistic spectrum or people with disabilities. How do we give that signal?
Everyone welcome is awesome, that's a great start. And another thing to remember is that folks with disabilities are in poverty. The more marginalized statuses you have, the more a little bit more on guard you're going to be. It's going to take a little bit of time to say, wait a second, this isn't what happened to me before. Maybe this is okay, and some of that will just. I wish I had a better, neater, less rambly answer than that, but does that get it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's building trust.
Yeah.
And that's always a challenge.
Oh, yeah, and you were asking about language. I mean, honestly, you know that our community has got every kind of viewpoint imaginable. It's different words are going to mean different things to different people, but basically, what I use is that the words I hear other people say give me information on how I should act, how I should present myself in front of them, including whether I should ask. So I'm not going to get on your case if you use a quote-unquote wrong word. I am going to, however, be listening for how I should be for how I should be acting and around what's usually going on. I'll usually be watching everything that's going on. Does that get at something? Does that?
Yeah.
Try to get a more structured, less rambly answer?
Yeah,
Do that,
because
right?
you're saying, I mean, it's helpful to be transparent about what we're offering and what expectations are and how it's going to be, like giving. Is that what you're saying? Some sort of, I mean, we talk about this, like we provide social stories for what is it like to come to the library. What are you going to expect? What's the space going to look like? Who will you meet? Who will you talk to? But I don't think we do that in our programs so much. We don't really.
Okay, I think I've got a more straightforward way of explaining it. It's that I'm not going to hang you up on a cross if you say the wrong word. What I'm really looking for is this a safe place where I don't have to put my mask on? That's pretty much it.
So how do you know that? What are the cues?
They'll be different for every person, but mine is, some of mine are, if people are using function labels, they're probably are not going to see my challenges, so I'm probably going to have to make a choice between do I stand up on a pedestal and or have your best day or your worst day. And that's kind of a signal for me. But then again, everybody's got their things. Thank you. Sure.
I understand your vision. When you're talking about, if there's something that's inviting people with disabilities, you go, okay, this is something that maybe I should look into. But then we've also had some discussions this weekend about we want to be all inclusive and we don't want to single out abilities. So that's a tough line to walk. What have been your experiences with advertising?
I feel you. I was an English major when I was in college.
Right, and it's a
Communicating is
continual
complicated.
Yeah, it is,
And
and
I
it's a
think we're
continual
not,
discussion, because we want both. We
Yeah.
want, and we have programs that are sensory programs, for example, or supported programs, and we'll say, this is a sensory or supported program for a community that, this is what the supports will be in the program. But then we have a lot of other programs that are for everyone that we could easily adapt. But what kind of cues do we give to our public that we are able to adapt a movie program or a music program for whatever needs someone might have? Like, how do we translate that message broadly? So, right?
Put it on your website and then sign it in front of your
Right.
library.
In my work, traveling around the state and having a
Yes.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, we're going to move right along. And see where I am next. Okay, Delene, they're just getting ready. Right, introduction.